Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey. On this show, we will be exploring the issues faced by men and boys everywhere. We will be sharing our perspectives and your own. Your host, Erin Pizzey, was born in 1939 in China while her father was stationed there as a member of the British Foreign Office. In 1971, Erin opened the first ever domestic violence refuge for battered women and children in Chiswick, England. What she found, however, was that many of the women coming into her shelter were as violent as the men they were fleeing. Over the years, she also tried to create resources and safe spaces for men as well as women, but frequently met with indifference and hostility to men suffering. Nevertheless, it's a passion she continues to hold to this day for men, for women, and especially for children.
For so many years, feminists have been able to demonize men under their artificial argument called patriarchy. Hi, I'm Erin Pizzey, and through working with battered women in my refuges, I saw for myself how family violence is passed on from one generation to the next. Quite simply, violent behavior experienced in childhood is often carried forward into adult relationships. Family violence is not a gender issue, and never was. It's a generational issue. To my amazement, nobody ever wanted to hear why violent people treat each other the way they do. Instead, feminists have had people believe that men are responsible for all the violence in our society. There is sufficient evidence that both men and women can be equally violent in their personal relationships, but for many years, men and boys have been held to ransom and have been made to live in the knowledge that they are dispensable and shamed. There is an enormous job ahead of us, but my hope is that the 21st century will see men and women standing shoulder to shoulder and working together to actively take on the feminists and to show everyone that domestic violence is not, and never has been, a gender issue.
The truth is that men and boys are not privileged in our society, but are often marginalised, disadvantaged and ignored. We will be inviting you to call in and discuss your views and your experiences. Anyone of any age, sex, sexual orientation or religious background is invited to call in and talk. We may not get to everyone, but we will do our best within the show's allotted time. If you do wish to call in to share your own experiences, you will probably want to keep things on a first-name basis. You may wish to use a pseudonym for yourself or family members so that there's no concern about privacy. Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. The truth is often painful to hear, but in truth there is hope, and we hope you will stick around to hear it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this week's episode of Revelations with Erin Pizzey. I'm Erin's co-host, Dean Esme. Say hello to the nice people, Erin.
Hello from London.
Hello from London. Hello from Michigan for Dean. And with us today on the show is our special guest, Dr. Warren Farrell, author of Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, The Myth of Male Power, and quite a number of other well-received and popular books. Say good morning, if you would, Warren.
Good morning, and we're here from San Francisco.
Excellent. All right. Hi, everybody. Well, we were pleased that Warren was able to join us. He's been telling us he's been very interested in following what we've been doing on A Voice for Men. I wanted to start the show by mentioning that on September 27th through 29th, Dr. Farrell will be leading a couples communication retreat for something called Esalen. How do you pronounce that, Warren?
Esalen is perfect.
Okay, Esalen. I guess that's ESALEN.org is the website. and this is a couples retreat for communications in Big Sur, California. You can go to warrenfarrell.com. I always misspell Warren's last name, but it's 2 R's and 2 thanks, 2 R's and 2 L's. Farrell at warrenfarrell.com. It's on his website, where you can also find a bunch of his other information, or you can go to sln.org and find out about that communication seminar. What do you do at that communication seminar anyway, Warren?
Well, basically, as you know, since I spent my life writing on books on males and females, I often found that when I gave people something that I thought was an insight, it was helpful, but it didn't really solve the underlying problem of their being able to hear each other effectively. And so even if they took something that I said content-wise and explained it, the other person would often experience it as criticism. And the real problem was that they couldn't hear criticism without becoming defensive. And so no matter how good the insight was, if it was good, they nevertheless, the other person was still getting defensive with it, and therefore the person who had the insight was fearful of giving it, and once he gave it, they weren't willing to hear the response that the other person gave, which might also have been insightful, at least from that person's perspective.
Oh, so you're saying I'm a bad husband?
No, I'm actually saying that all men and women have in common, among other things, their inability to hear personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive. And that I believe that that's biologically true, meaning that historically speaking, if there, Erin's in England, and if England was hearing from Spain a lot of negative things, that England might be fearful that Spain would be getting ready to attack them. And so they would get up their defenses, and they might even attack Spain before Spain attacked them. And so the basic way we survived was by being extremely sensitive to attack or criticism, and and getting up our defenses, so to speak. But the problem, and that was pretty good for survival, but it wasn't very good for being able to allow your intimate partner to feel heard and safe in saying what is bothering him or her. And so I started to develop basically a workaround to this biologically natural response of being defensive when your partner had something to say that was negative. And so I began to realize that I'd have to create an altered mind state, like almost go into a meditative state, and so that you'd have to set aside time during the week when you did this, and leave the rest of the week at what I call a conflict-free zone. And then during this set-aside time, I had people do a meditation that allowed them to associate their partner opening up to them and having a safe environment from them to say whatever she or he wanted to have that space, to associate that with knowing that their partner would feel more loved by them, more protected by them, and therefore love them more. So it's a matter of associating the criticism with love rather than associating the criticism with being killed.
Do you find that men and women perceive those criticisms differently, or need different communication strategies for that sort of thing?
When they do this, that is a communication strategy that works about equally for both sexes. The sexes get defensive for different reasons. Women, when a man criticizes a woman, it's like it wipes away something deep inside of the woman that wants protection from that man, and so the criticism feels like she can no longer count on him as a protector. Conversely, with a man, he spends a lot of his life, learning skills and performing so that he can feel like he can be a hero to a woman and a protector to a woman. But when he starts criticizing, but when he feels that the woman is criticizing him, she goes from being cheerleader and somebody that he's worked hard to perform for to somebody who's now chopping him down. And so he starts becoming. He feels like she won't like him or love him if she doesn't respect him, and the criticism is not signaling respect. So he fears that he's going to lose her respect and therefore lose her love. So he starts defending himself and saying, no, I didn't do this. That was my purpose and that type of thing. And what she really needs to be, what really needs to happen for both men and women is they need to feel that when something is bothering them, they can feel heard before anything else, and not just feel heard, but be drawn out and facilitated, and so that you not only are saying what you feel, but as you feel your environment is safe, you're discovering things inside of yourself that you felt or you feared that you didn't even know you were thinking and fearing when you were about ready to say that. And so when men and women do that for each other, I know for my wife and I, it has made an enormous difference. My wife is, fairly traditional and Christian, and I'm more Buddhist in my orientation, and so we know, and she tended to be very protective toward children, and I tended to sort of be more like it's important to get out there and try things, and if you fall down, get up and do it again. And so we had a lot of communication to do in order to really deepen our love. So that was really crucial for both of us.
Interesting. So that's a 3-day workshop you typically do. I assume there's obviously no way you can get into it, to all the details of it, but I gather you've seen some real success stories from that. And
yeah, so last weekend I just had a chance to go to a wedding of a couple in the group that was about to split up, and it was just a wonderful experience of just seeing their love united. In fact, I flew in some people from England who had who were doing chanting for them, and then flew in a singer from New York who was Steve Tyrell, who sang in Father of the Bride. So it's quite a weekend wedding.
Oh. It's good to hear that, because even though on A Voice for Men we've developed a pretty negative attitude about marriage and all of that, I think most people with what goes on in what some euphemistically call the gender war, most of us would like to see some sort of rapprochement or just some sort of ceasefire, and men and women to start liking each other again. It'd be nice to see that, wouldn't it, Erin?
Oh, it would indeed. Actually, I can vouch for Warren's efficiency, because I still take away, there was a class you gave, and I think it was at the conference you had in Jamaica, where you were actually talking to us about our fathers and asking, you remember, each one of us to think of something that our fathers hadn't done, but we were doing for them, something like that. And I suddenly recognized that my father, all his life, dreamed of being a public speaker, and he couldn't, because every time he started to say anything in public, he ended up ranting. So guess what I've been doing? I'm a public speaker.
Isn't that fascinating? Yes.
But it's thanks to you, because I wouldn't have thought, it was your insight.
Well, thank you. One of the things I find is that when I say things, like if I speak about something, that's maybe somewhat helpful, but what Erin is referring to is an experience that I do with my groups and my workshops and audiences, and where I have people get together in a group of 3, and each of them say, basically what their father did for a living, and then I create a visualization of all the things about what created the glint in your father's eye, if you ever saw a glint in your dad's eye during the course of your life. And then I asked them to identify what that glint was about, and it might be a glint coming from playing with the couple's children that I'm dealing with, or it might be a glint from fishing, or from flying a plane, or something along those lines. And then I asked them to imagine what their father would be like if he was doing that all his life, as opposed to doing what he did, like maybe be an accountant. And most people could sort of see that glint and wondered, and then realize that when they were born, that the thing that created the glint in the father's eye, maybe fishing or playing with children full time, would probably not make a good enough living to be able to provide enough for economic security. And so that what we call male power, which is earning money, is actually about forfeiting power. If you define power as control over your own life and being really happy, And there's no greater, really, form of power than having control over your own life and pursuing happiness. And yet almost all our fathers gave up the pursuit of their happiness and their fantasy of what they'd love to do and what created the glint in their eye in order to earn money that often somebody else would spend and often they would die sooner. And so that helps a lot of people feel, well, wow, my father was away from me a lot, but in fact, he was away from me. That was his way of loving me. He wasn't away from me because he didn't like me. He didn't forget to show up to that concert because he didn't love me. He didn't show up to that concert because he was out making money that would allow me to have the freedom to play in concerts rather than drive a cab.
Now that gets into, you hit on something there that's bugged me for the longest time. I found that arguing with feminists about this and other things is usually a waste of time and energy because they don't want to hear it, but you just said something so important that I know is true of my father, and I know was true at one point for me, and so many other fathers I know. I get tired of hearing that the so-called power, economic power of having to shunt off to work every damn day to a job you may even hate is some sort of privilege when for most men, not all, but most men, it's a sacrifice, sometimes a terrible sacrifice. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. The road to high pay is basically a toll road. You get more money when you pay more tolls, when you pay the toll of working more hours, when you pay the toll of moving to some place where you don't necessarily want to move to, but the company is opening up a new branch there, or just has had problems with that branch and it needs savings, or you, if you're uneducated, you may, and minimally skilled, you make more money as a garbage collector than you do, selling at a retail store. But you have to get up at 4 in the morning and you have to collect garbage and you have to, hurt your back and be out in rain and sleet and snow. But for that, you get more money than you do if you're in the safety and the comfort of a retail store. And so when I did research for a book called Why Men Earn More, one of the things I discovered was that there was actually 25 significant measurable differences between men and women's typical work-life choices, and they all have something in common. Every single difference that the man does leads to the man earning more money, and every single thing that women do on average leads to women having more balanced lives. And for the most part, people with more balanced lives tend to be happier. And so what the pay gap can really be thought of as a happiness gap between men and women, in which men need to learn from women how to balance their lives. But when you became a father, historically, part of your role was to not worry about balancing your life. It was to engage in what I call the father's catch-22. The father's catch-22 being that the father learned to love his family by being away from the love of his family, by being in the workplace. And he learned qualities at work, like say he was an attorney, and he learned to listen for the purpose of interrupting someone else and creating an argument while the other person was talking. And that skill set that made him a great attorney oftentimes made him unable to love, because children and wives do not appreciate being interrupted and critiqued rather than listened to. And so all those things are things that if we had a really good gender transition movement, we'd be understanding the traumas and the problems and the challenges that women went through, but we would simultaneously be understanding the problems and challenges that men experience, because for the first time in human history, we have an opportunity to go from the rigid roles of the past to flexible roles of the future, and that should be the discussion, not women good, men bad.
Well, I'm going to challenge you a little on something there, Warren, because you just said men could learn from women. I got to be honest with you. My experience, I'm a little younger than you, but I'm 47. But it almost seems like women don't want men to do that. I see this experience. I've seen it in my own life and in other lives. Women seem to become somehow resentful of a man who doesn't want to put career at the center of his, making more money at the center of his existence. Do you think I'm wrong about that?
I wish you were, but and here's where where you're most right is when women contemplate having children. And when it's very rare that a woman who has the intention of having children will marry a man who she believes will earn less than she and continue to earn less than she. So if he's a medical doctor, a medical student and earning less, that's fine. But if he's, if she perceives him as likely to always earn less, she will tend to not marry him if she wants children. She says to herself, I don't want one more child to support. What she misses, and so therefore the consequences of that in England, the United States, Australia, and so on. In the United States, as in 2010, 53% of women 30 and under who had children without being married. And the challenge of having children without being married, oftentimes, and the reason for that, having children without being married, is feeling that they can't find a man they are really attracted to, etc., who earns as much or more than she does. And so she doesn't marry him at all. And when a woman doesn't marry a man, at about 50% of the cases, the men have no contact at all with the children. And in the rest of the cases, they have what I call a hierarchical contact with the children, meaning that the mother's in charge and the father has contact with the children as long as the father behaves in the way the mother feels the father should behave. And that takes the value of the father away, because a good father and a good mother are checks and balances to each other. Women tend to be overly protective. Men tend to be overly pushing and without being empathetic enough. And the two together provide what a child usually needs. And so you're absolutely right that women will have sex with men who aren't very successful and don't put their career first if the man is attractive. They'll even live with them, but they will very rarely marry them if they don't believe they're going to earn as much or more. And when they will even more. They'll even be less likely to marry them if they are desiring to have children.
I have to tell you, there's a growing number of men who have figured this out and thus look at it and say, well, why would I even try then? Why? And she can divorce me. She can take everything I've made if I work hard for her. So I shouldn't work hard for her. Do I want to work hard for myself? Where's my winning strategy as a man? And an awful lot of men, younger men in particular, are just saying, screw this. I don't want to have anything to do with any of it. And I wonder sometimes if there's an out for that or a solution for that.
And for the reason I do the couples communication workshops is because I think the only solution that I see, first of all, your larger point, the framework is very challenging, especially for men, especially if there's children, and especially if there's a chance of divorce. So my way around that is knowing that more than the structure, that most people want to feel loved, we want to feel heard, we want to feel as a partner on our team. And so it's creating a way of being able to communicate so your partner is happy. That doesn't mean that there will ever be a divorce, but it means that you minimize that chance to a much greater degree. And we all want the same thing. We all want love. We all want respect. We all want appreciation. And I'm sure, Erin, you know that when you see a couple with that, the chances of domestic violence goes down enormously. And when people are interrupting and distorting what the other one says, the chances of domestic violence goes up considerably.
I think also something I'm finding, that this generation of women, Lenny Bruce said it many, many years ago. He said the trouble with women is they want to make their men into girlfriends. And there's a lot of truth in that, you know. I don't know if Warren, if you see this, but so few women actually understand and know what is a man. They actually berate their male partners because they're not more like other women. And I constantly have to say to a woman, it's no good saying to a man, I want to sit down and discuss this endlessly, because that isn't what men do. You say to your male partner, I need help, this is what the problem is, and then he'll be able to do something about it. But it's no good getting cross because he doesn't sit down over a glass of white wine like your girlfriend and spend 3 hours analyzing.
Yes, definitely men are different that way. One of the things I train men to do is to understand that we as men, what I ask women to visualize is that from a man's perspective, when a woman we love is crying, she's hurt. Us sitting there listening to her and is like watching her cry. It's like watching her bleed. And from a man's perspective, when the woman we love is crying or bleeding, so to speak, our job is to fix the problem, stop the bleeding. And so, but what I say to men is, I particularly have challenges with this with very successful men. And I reframe it for them and I say, men, when you listen, you are stopping the bleeding. You are solving the problem. So if you are oriented toward problem solving, this is the way you solve your problem. You don't have to stop solving the problem. You have to learn a way of solving the problem that's updated, that we have learned is more effective. And when it's put in the framework of updating it, they are usually able to think that way because that's part of their training, is to constantly update their way of solving problems.
Although I have seen the catch-22 where I do try to, and I've been in multiple relationships, so I don't want anybody to think I'm describing my current relationship per se, but I've been in this interesting trap where I've tried that one, Warren. I just sat there and listened, and then she got mad at me because I didn't get up and do something. Well, they often want you to get up and do something to fix it. They can't decide sometimes which it is they want.
I say that there's a time when that's the case. So here's an example, Dean. So the woman is saying, I'm really upset about this and da-da-da, and you're saying to yourself, my goodness, that's a contradiction to what she said the other day. It's the opposite of what she, and that's not doesn't make any sense, and you're sort of thinking that, no, when you're listening, you're just watching the river flow. You're just being there for her. You're holding her emotionally in your arms, and you're not worrying about doing anything about it. You're just there for her. When she says, when she's finished that process of the emotions coming out of her, then you ask her, then she may say to you some version of, what should I do? And the right answer to that question is, what do you think you should do? And because when you say immediately what she should do, the real message to her is that I'm smarter than you. I know in a moment what should be done, even though you have spent your lifetime and still don't know what should be done. And so and very frequently when you ask a woman, what do you think you should do, you get two pieces of information. You get her solving her own problem and or her asking you for help with something. And when she asks you for help with something, or you say to her, is there anything that I can do to help you toward the end, and she volunteers it, that's the time to get up and do it. Or, and so the sequence is everything.
Warren, there's something I've always wanted to ask somebody as wise as you, because you can probably give me an answer. So many men feel very helpless when their partners once a month suffer from premenstrual tension. Now, it can go from sort of screaming rows to taking to the bed for 3 weeks out of the month. How can men handle that? Because so many men, it's an amazing pain in many men's lives, but they don't talk about it.
Yes, I haven't experienced it being as long as the 3-week part, but certainly I understand the up to the 1 week part. Thank goodness the latter is, and so the way to handle that, the best way to handle that is first of all to know that it is a difference. It's like, you have a baby and you just accept the fact that the baby is likely to cry a fair amount in the middle of the night, and so you sort of work yourself into getting used to getting up in the middle of the night. And so, men and women both have their shadow sides and their upsides, so if the woman that you love is one who is likely to be affected by that, the best response is just to be there for her, because the more she feels support, the more at least the psychological addition of feeling unsupported that will add to her problems and her stress, which will therefore elongate the period of time that she's suffering. You can only reduce it by supporting her and being there for her. And usually the result, the other day, a couple of nights ago, my wife woke up in the middle of the night. She had one of her major clients she had lost, and she hadn't heard from her daughter for a while, and everything was coming together in a way that woke her up. And she was really upset and cried, and I didn't say a single thing, just held her and petted her and was there for her. And and at the end she said, "Thank you so much," and then fell soundly asleep and had a really good sleep. But if I had tried to sort of say, "No, it will be okay," I gave her assurances, and she didn't at that point in time need assurance. She needed the assurance of my holding and being there for her, and my love, and my switching the sides of the bed so she could get more air and things like that. Those were the things that were really important for her. And so it is really important for men to be able to, take out that glass of white wine and listen, but it's also important for women to be able to do that for men. Men, we often talk about men going into caves, and the reason men go into their caves, in John Gray type terms, is because we don't feel there's even a chance of being listened to when we are vulnerable. Women need to understand that when we get married, what we give up is we give up a fantasy of having access to a large variety of attractive women.
And being an astronaut and being a fireman and being the great novelist. And
yes, we give up. Well, we definitely give up things like being a great novelist and artist, but usually, or particularly, we give up being a mediocre novelist or artist, because as a mediocre novelist or artist, we're probably less likely to make really good money, and we also give up the. So we want and we need when we get married we give up the fantasy of a large variety of women, and what we trade that fantasy in for is intimacy, and which is our primary need. We need to, because men, when we are hurting and when we are vulnerable, we don't easily reach out to other men. So when a woman in our life can hear our pain without becoming fearful that we're losing the hero status and losing the protector status, that's when she really serves her husband well. And so, really a lot of relationships can be healed significantly by both partners listening to each other, but for different reasons. It's very difficult for both men to do that with women for the reasons you mentioned, Erin, and for women to do that with men, because the woman on some level, it's like IBM saying to their employees, I'd like you to know that you've all been accusing us of being very straight and conservative, and we've really done a lot of introspection about that, so we've decided giving up making computers, and we're going to make art pieces that come from our heart, so that we're more in touch with our feelings. And suddenly all the IBM employees go, well, wait a minute, we didn't want you to go that far. And so many men experience that.
We're talking now about how what functional relationships between men and women might look like, and how you're doing work trying to help people make that happen. That's one end of this discussion. By interesting coincidence, you're going to be doing that September 27th through 29th in Big Sur, California. I'll mention again, that's with a group called Esalen, ESALEN.org on the web if you're interested in that. By interesting coincidence, on the complete opposite side, where we've seen family breakdown, problems for boys, problems for men. On September 27th and 28th, I want to mention that there's an event that we hope people can get to in Toronto, Canada, a place Warren is quite familiar with. Professor Miles Groth will be giving a speech there to the Canadian Association for Equality, where we would not be at least a bit surprised to see some protests. And the next day, Attila Windsor of Canadian Court Watch, A Voice for Men, and a number of other men's groups will be gathering together to stage a protest over a number of issues affecting boys and men these days. And we expect to be protested by feminists and other groups just like they did to you last year, Warren. That must have been quite an experience for you, eh?
It was. It was a wonderful experience, meaning
wonderful?
Yes. It's been wonderful in the sense that I half jokingly say that I'll have to hire those protesters to come everywhere I go, because the result of their protest, which was not just a protest, by the way, but was literally a 100-person human barricade in which they prevented people from coming in to hear me speak at the University of Toronto. And I was speaking on the boy crisis, what's happening to boys today, and a number of feminists objected to a book I wrote called The Myth of Male Power, and they were there literally preventing people from coming into the entrances to hear me speak. And they all claimed retrospectively that the police were very violent and prevented them from coming in. But fortunately, a documentary filmmaker named Steve Brule, B-R-U-L-E, was filming a documentary on men's issues, and so was able to film the entire demonstration out there. And so it's, and so he was able to, so you can see the feminists are spitting at the police. They are calling them F-ing scum, and just one swear word after the other getting right in the police's face, and the police were just restraining themselves.
Not just the police, but also young men who were trying to get in there just to see you speak. Fortunately, people were able to. I don't know if you're aware or not, but there have been two subsequent events there with Cafe where we had Dr. Janice Flamengo and, two other speakers. And each and every time, it's been a repetition of that event there at the University of Toronto. No blockading of the doors these times, but screaming and bullhorns and banging and threatening and pulling fire alarms and.
And here is the real challenge with this. I've led many protests, and so I have no problem with protests. I do have problems with preventing people access to hear somebody speak. But the really amazing thing that's happened in Canada has been that the Canadian Federation of Students, which is the largest student organization in Canada and is in charge of most of the student unions in Canada, including the University of Toronto, passed a resolution saying that men's rights groups or men's issues groups take away the center stage for the central voice for women on gender equity, and were considered therefore hate speech, and therefore should not be allowed to be on campus. The result of that is that no student group can set up a table to recruit on campus. No student group gets any percentage of the student activities fees to be able to finance any of their programs. No student can go into, no student group of this nature that is men's issues oriented can go in to use a Xerox machine to print up a poster, and no one tends to object to their posters being pulled down. The Cafe, the group you spoke of, the Canadian Association for Equality, estimated that hundreds, maybe 200-300 of the posters they put up to advertise my event were torn down within an hour or two.
Oh, and they were proud to tear them down, too, which I even noticed in the language of some of those, they said basically any group that acknowledged misandry, which is the hatred or disliking of men, should even be recognized. Like misandry isn't a thing, like it doesn't exist, and if you suggest that it does, that automatically marks you as a hate group. It's rather Orwellian in its sort of language. I also noticed, and it's almost painful to bring it up, but I've got to ask. These people, by the way, at the protests for Fiamengo and for, I've got to apologize.
Nathanson and Young, who wrote Legalizing Misandry.
There you go, Nathanson and Young. Okay, Warren, you just take over the show for me, would you?
You're great. You do a great job.
No, just kidding. Yes, Nathanson and Young, they got protested too, but at yours, they were coming out and they were saying you're an incest supporter. And I've had this incest supporter thing thrown in my face a number of times. I believe I know what the story is. Can you tell me a minute where that business comes from?
Sure. Some years ago, Ms. Magazine wrote an article saying that somebody who had an incest experience basically had the equivalent of terminal cancer. And I said to myself, wow, that's really, that's this woman, therefore, is, if she sees herself as having terminal cancer, she's obviously not going to have any hope in her life. And so I said, I wondered to myself, were there people that had different responses to the experience? And so I looked at 14 different types of incest experience, from cousin to cousin, from brother and sister, brother and brother, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that there were different people that handled different experiences in different ways. And so my job was to sort of be able to create a therapeutic model in which they could handle the experience more as effectively as the people who did manage to handle it most effectively. It's sort of like looking at marriage and finding out, are there people who have happy marriages, or that, even though they're on the verge of divorce, and so is there a way out of this? And so I interviewed a lot of different people, but I feared that if some people had experiences that weren't the equivalent of terminal cancer, that might be able to be distorted by somebody that was saying that I was approving of incest, which I never have and never will. And so I allowed myself to be interviewed by a magazine, and that magazine did a pretty good job of the interview, but they did the average reader confused the person who I was quoting as if I believed what they were saying. So they confused the message with the messenger. And so, and that led to a lot of, and that was just completely understood by most people that read that article. But years later, when The Myth of Male Power came out, there was a woman who said, I am going to prove that every footnote in The Myth of Male Power is a distortion or not true. And she was not able to do that with any of the footnotes in the book. And so she tried to find some way of attacking me personally, and then distorting that research into being something where I was advocating for incest was really her way of trying to make the messages in The Myth of Male Power not be credible.
She was trying to discredit the man because she couldn't discredit the information the man was sharing. It just seems odd. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it just seems odd that if you find some odd person who has not felt traumatized by an incest experience, and you just mention that this occasionally happens, that makes you an advocate for something. And everything I've seen for you, you've never advocated any such thing.
But no. I did a lot of work, obviously, with victims of incest in all of my work, actually. And just as you say, some can transcend, and they shouldn't be penalized for it. And even some can retain fond memories of the parent and actually feel compassion and pity. And I don't think they should be punished, and you shouldn't be. Neither should I be punished for being.
Or told that they have the equivalent of terminal cancer and that they're damaged for life when all they've done is recover.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It was like people who would say, once you are an alcoholic, you will never be able to have a functional life. But what Alcoholics Anonymous has helped people do is realize, yes, you have to always call yourself a recovering alcoholic because you have that constant challenge. But on the other hand, there are ways around that challenge that can allow you to lead a functional and compassionate life.
Absolutely.
I'm a recovering alcoholic myself. Mm-hmm. And thank God that I don't drink anymore, and I do have a happy and functional life. Hell, I get to work with Erin Pizzey, so envy me, you more.
Yes. And from what I could tell, in my discussion with your wife, you know, a charming and attractive. I can't tell about attractive, but she's attractive, sounding, wonderful, compassionate woman.
As we say in England, she's a cracker.
A cracker. Ah, yes.
So, Warren, you were part of an attempt to create something called the White House Council for Boys and Men. I know Tom Golden, who's done our show and has done some work with us on A Voice for Men, was also part of that effort. And from everything I've seen and everything I've read, it sounds like people at the White House nodded and patted you on the head and did nothing with your ideas for that. Is that basically right?
Yes, I still have the pat marks, though. Yes, here's the background on that. I have been on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and one of the people at the White House knew that. And so when the White House Council on Women and Girls was formed, I was called by the White House and asked to be a part of that council, an advisory group, part of the advisory group to that White House Council on Women and Girls. And I said I'd be more than delighted to do that. They never ended up forming the council, by the way. But but I also felt there was a lot of challenges that boys were having today, and that needed to be investigated as well. And so if there's going to be a White House Council on Women and Girls, there really also needs to be a White House Council on Men and Boys. And the person who had called me said, well, this sounds great to me, but I'm in charge of filling commissions that already exist. Why don't you create a proposal for, a White House Council on Men and Boys? And so I decided that I didn't want to do that myself because I really felt it was important for any proposal like that to come from a variety of experts, to come not just from academics but also practitioners, and not just from liberals or from conservatives, and not just from men but also from women. And so I gathered together a group of 30 people who in the United States who were among the greatest experts, both like the person who was in charge of the government relations for the Boy Scouts of the United States, the person who was in charge of Men's Health magazine, and also people who were authors of books on boys, and women like Jennifer Granholm, the governor of Michigan, the former governor of Michigan, and so people who were liberal, conservative, and so on. And so together we spent more than a year, about 18 months.
Jennifer Granholm was part of that?
Jennifer Granholm, she came in later, but after we did the proposal, but she is part of that commission right now, and she has been for the last about 8-10 months part of the commission. And she wasn't able to be that while she was governor of Michigan, but after she completed her term, she was. And so she is, so all of us got together and basically said there are 5 significant problem areas. Boys have problems in job futures because in the old days, if a boy was not academically inclined, he could become a mechanic or a construction worker or factory worker. And the construction and factory workers, the types of jobs that boys tend to go into if they're not academically inclined, tend to be very subject to recessions. So when we had our last recession, it was called a man session because 80% of the people that lost their jobs initially were men. And so and yet the school systems, for example, are not doing a good job with modern versions of vocational education. Boys also have different learning styles, as you know, and implied a little while ago. They're more likely to need to move around, be physical, and recess and physical education is extremely important to boys, and that's being cut back. Only 8 states in the United States require physical education as part of the school day or week, and only 6 states require recess. And so that used to be almost everyone had recess and physical education multiple times during the weekend or day. And so the things that allow boys to succeed are being cut back as opposed to expanded.
I can almost tell that Erin's probably chuckling because whenever I'm doing this radio show, I'm pacing and she gets to watch me pace.
Oh, is that right?
Anyway.
Am I taking was my answer too long in today?
Not at all. I pace through the entire show, every show. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I can just
go on. Then.
So I'll just summarize this. So basically, what we saw is that the problems that boys face, they can be assisted by different dimensions of the government, but it's not. So HHS can help with health areas like men dying sooner than women in life expectancy areas. The Department of Education can help with schools and so on. And in mental health areas, a different department can be of help because boys are likely to commit suicide much more frequently than girls as they get to know their male roles. So it starts out to be equal to girls at the age of 9. By the age of 10 to 14, the boys' suicide rate is twice what girls is. 15 to 19, it's 4 times what girls is. And 20 to 24, it's 5.6 times what girls is. And so you have this enormous increase in suicide rate as boys' hormones and their role becomes clear to them. And so we need to look into these things. And so the White House responded by saying, very good, nice, but, they had in one. The reason I like this White House Council on Boys and Men idea is because President Obama could do it with the same way he did the White House Council on Girls and Women, is just make an executive resolution. He doesn't have to go through Congress, and he has not done that, not been willing to do that, and not been willing to see some of our representatives who were ready to make that proposal to him. And so we've been very disappointed with that. And that's one of the challenges with the liberals, is that liberals in the United States tend to feel that the world has been made by men for men at the expense of women, and therefore any effort to create something like a White House Council on Women and Girls should not be balanced, because they see that as being some of the few resources that women have, and that resources to boys are going to take away from resources to women and girls, whereas I and the people on the commission see the family as being a win-win situation. If you help daughters, you help sons. If you help sons, you help daughters, that we're all in the family boat together. We either sink together or we swim together.
Well, it's absurd, Warren, the amount of money that goes into women's programs, women's health programs, violence against women, research for various women's health issues just runs into the billions and billions every year, and yet there's barely a penny for that. Now, of course, you mentioned liberals don't want to hear it, and I have conservative friends, and I am conservative on some issues, and they start wanting to bash on liberals, and that's part of politics. That's what people do. But I've often asked them, and so what is the long list of conservative achievements for men and boys? And usually I get silence for a change of subject, or they get angry with me. Because that list is, I just made the list. There's their list of achievements for men and boys. Notice I didn't mention anything. Yes, ma'am.
I think it tends to go back, and I know Warren has experience of this, way back to the 1970s and all the way through, the attitude that the family is now women and children. Men are disenfranchised. So why would any government wish to do anything in particular for men and boys when essentially, as far as they're concerned, there is no place for them? They haven't left any place for men as boys to grow up into. Have they?
I'm afraid you're absolutely right. The government has become a substitute husband, and the incentives have often been in the form of if a woman doesn't have a husband, and then the government will give her money if the man does not live with her, or if the man is not married to her. So the woman then says, okay, especially in inner cities where people may be poor, the woman may say, gee, I have a choice between getting married to this man and who's not earning much money or any money, versus getting a paycheck from the government. Okay, I'll get a paycheck from the government, but that means I can't marry you, can't live with you, and therefore the child doesn't have your fathering as part of his or her life. And so in areas where that happened, Dan Moynihan and even people before him said years ago that this, where you see this happening, you see the child being very unable to achieve academically likely, having many fewer social skills. Very few people realize that all around the world, the degree to which there is father involvement is the degree to which children develop empathy.
Mm. Really?
This is so counterintuitive because men aren't inherently more empathetic than women are, but because the father is more likely to force the child to consider the father's needs, the child has to start thinking of somebody else's needs other than his or her own, whereas when the child is constantly empathized with, the empathy reinforces the child thinking only about his or her own needs. So the child of very empathetic parents often becomes self-centered, whereas the child of a parent who requires things of the child, like the child and the parent are wrestling together, and the father says, "Excuse me, you can't poke me in the eye, you can't kick me in the groin, and if you do that, there won't be any more wrestling until next week." And so the child, forgets and continues to do that, and the father just stops the wrestling and says, "Okay, we'll pick it up again next week, but no more wrestling tonight. You forgot about doing that." And suddenly the child realizes it can't just do that and be reminded to not do that again and again, but continue to do the poking or the pulling. It has to think about the father's needs in order to get what it wants. And so the father is far more likely to require that thinking of others or paying the consequence to a child than a mother is. And so
they have less empathy. I've never heard that, but I can believe that. And in any case, we've already know from exhaustive decades of study, children without a father in the home more likely to be depressed, more likely to commit suicide, more likely to have teen pregnancies, more likely to wind up in drug addiction, more likely to wind up in jail, more likely to walk out of school. It's across the board. It's a terrible thing. I don't think you'd disagree with me at all. And here in America, anyway, people think you're talking like a rock-ribbed conservative when you talk like that. But no, we're just talking about what the empirical science shows.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The list of problems, and even if you look at the empathy thing in relation to what you said, somebody that doesn't have empathy is less likely to make friends because friends don't want to be with somebody who doesn't understand them. And so when you're without friends, you're socially more isolated, more likely to be depressed. And if you're more likely to be depressed over a period of time, you're more vulnerable to suicide. And so you're more likely to wake up in the middle of the night and have temper tantrums. You're less likely to do well in school and be focused. You're more likely to withdraw into video games. When you withdraw into video games, that feeds the part of your brain that likes winning at a video game, but it deprives blood to the part of the brain that allows you to win in real life. So you become less functional in real life. And so the less functional you become in real life, the more you lose self-confidence, the more you become antisocial, the more you become depressed, and so on.
And you mentioned this. You mentioned Dan. I think you were referring to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the great
I was
senator. He identified these problems years ago. Liberal Democrat, by the way,
yes.
Staunch one. But he identified these problems decades ago in the lower classes, in the welfare dependent. But I think we're seeing the same development now with the growth of, I'll just go ahead and call it the divorce industry, where, all right, you're middle class, even upper middle class, and all right, you're not going to get food stamps and welfare, but you're going to get alimony and child support, and you still decided you don't need a man. And
yes.
I find that these children wind up having the same exact problems, maybe a little less likely to go to jail because they're middle class, but otherwise all the problems are the same from what I can see. And the women wind up often unhappy.
It is a triple lose-lose situation. The dad feels he has no purpose and is isolated. The mother is overwhelmed because mothers do not enforce boundaries as well. They say don't do something, much more frequently than men do, but they don't enforce each time they say it. What they do as a result, the child is constantly manipulating the mother to a greater degree, and children of with single moms are far more likely to be coercive. The mother is far more likely to say she's overwhelmed and exhausted. So without the father, the mother is far more likely to be overwhelmed and exhausted. The child will tend to become more disobedient, more likely to be delinquent, more likely to be drinking, more likely to be into drugs. No mother who devotes her entire life to raising a child wants a child in that type of state. So the mother becomes frustrated with herself, her life, her children, and all of that can be significantly reduced. That pain all the way around can be significantly reduced when a mother and father are working together. And if you have a father, that is not, when I did the research for a book called Father and Child Reunion, I just really was astonished at the degree to which the involvement of the dad, even after a divorce, can be significantly valuable if three things are paid attention to. If the involvement is about equal of father and mother, you need to keep the mother involved also, but you need to keep the father and mother about equally involved. The father and mother need to live close enough to each other so the child doesn't have to give up time with friends and time with sports and activities in order to see the parent that is living at a greater distance from the area where she or he is going to school. And the third thing is that the child can hear or sense no bad-mouthing or put-downs from the mother toward the father or the father toward the mother. If you have those three things intact, equal time, close proximity, and lack of bad-mouthing, the child has almost has a chance of doing as well as she or he would do in an intact family.
And it's a hard row to hoe, and we seem to have a justice family court system that's designed to make those things harder to do. I have to be although it took a lot of work after my divorce, I was able to arrange things so that I live only a half a mile from my children, and I'm on the phone with them daily and all of that. But I know a number of men find themselves in a position where they can't do that financially, or they've got an ex who just won't let it happen. How do you think we get through to people and make people understand, make women understand that this matters?
Yes, first of all, it's really an outstanding question. Secondly, we often talk about male heroes. To me, the male hero is someone who's doing like you're doing, living in an area that is not your first choice, perhaps, but yet you are living there because you know that your children need you there. And even you could fight your ex-wife and put all the money you've made and potentially she's made down into the court system, but you've chosen to really connect with your children, and your wife has been good enough to be your current wife has been good enough to be supportive of that. So to me, that's real heroism, to be honest, Dean.
But the major, Warren, one of the major problems is a vast amount of people who become divorced are perfectly capable of arranging their divorce and the relationships they have with their children. That's the majority. But what you're seeing clogging up courts and fighting is where one or other parent, or even both parents, are incapable of putting their children's needs first.
Well, I think some of it is that they don't know, and they're encouraged not to see what the best interests are. I think the courts often have this definition of best interests that isn't, because it's all about the money rather than a structured working relationship between the divorced parents.
Yes, I think everything that you just said, Erin, and you said, Dina, is true, and they all really work together. If you speak to most judges will say to you, I think it's best for the children to be involved with both parents after divorce. However, in this particular case, these parents can't get along with each other. So therefore, I, the judge, need to make a decision as to whether the mother or the father is more likely to be able to raise the children as the primary parent. But in fact, the more the mother and father are in conflict with each other, the more the child needs the court to say, both parents need to be involved. You have no choice but to figure out a way of having both of you involved. And we'll take it from that stance. So the courts have not understood And when the courts make that decision that there has to be a primary parent, what the court then usually does is have a maternal bias in that direction. It's sort of like, okay, I don't know which way to go, but unless the mother's really bad, then we're going to have the primary parent be the mother. Or they go, well, the child needs to be stabilized because the divorce is destabilizing the child. So therefore, the child's been with the mother mostly, so I'll keep the child with the mother. So one way or the other, the mother gets the advantage. But what the court doesn't understand is that what the child needs after divorce is not geographical stability. The child needs parental stability. The child needs the involvement of both parents.
Bingo.
When children do the best, not when they are geographically in one place and abandoned by the other parent. And so, more of my time and most of my income actually comes from explaining this to judges. And this should not, this should be part of we need to make this part of the general understanding so that people like me don't have to go into court explaining this. This has not become part of the public consciousness yet.
And who fights you on that, Warren?
Well, always, not usually, but always I am being fought by the mother's attorney. I've always said, give me a woman who wants the husband involved and the father that is preventing that husband, the wife from being involved, and I will do that. I will do a pro bono for that woman. But I have not had that happen for me yet.
Even you've never had a mother trying?
I've never had a mother call me and say,
I want to be more involved with my children.
I want to be equally involved with my children. My husband, the husband has the children and won't let me be equally involved. Usually the man very much understands the need for the mother to be in the child's life, and the man on a selfish level cares a great deal about having some freedom in his life as well, and to develop a new relationship. And speaking positively about the women here, usually women don't withdraw from involvement from their children, even if the father is a primary parent. So on all those counts, it works itself out very well if the court says you need to figure out a way of being equally involved. You need to live close to each other, no matter where that is. And the only way you don't get equally involved is if one of you, if it's documented that one of you is bad-mouthing the other one or denying visitation or involvement of the other one. Under those circumstances, then one of the parents that is the least obstructive needs to be the primary parent.
Well, I'll tell you, just to mention, I may grab you offline, Warren, because I've been doing this for many years. I've seen exactly one case of a woman in that situation. I might tell you about her. Maybe she could use your help. But you're right.
Sure.
You hear from every damn day on A Voice for Men. We hear from men screaming for help because they don't have the money or the resources, and they just don't know what to do, and all they want is to be in their children's lives. It's brutal and horrible and painful. Yes.
If we had shared parenting, I think that would go a long way towards resolving the issue.
One of the things that's incredibly...
Absolutely right.
Let me just go say one thing. At least this is true in the United States. It's every time I hear the word shared parenting now, I cringe a little because legislators and judges will say, we have shared parenting. That's the law now. And what they really mean is shared parenting is you will share joint medical and educational decisions, but the father will still only see their child every other weekend. And that is shared parenting. I know, but it's become this term of art in many parts of the United States of, well, we already have that. Why are you asking for it? And then you wind up having to explain shared parenting is not every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. Because I'm just agreeing with you. I'm talking about the terminology only. I think that unless you have a minimum of about 30% time with the child, if not closer to 50 being better, you don't have shared parenting. Judges do need to understand, no, shared parenting really means physical proximity together.
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. This is it's verbiage that doesn't mean what it says in the United States, and the reason that close to 50% has to be the father involvement is because when the child lives, say, primarily with one parent, it begins to adopt the values of that parent, and the other parent can easily seem like they're not being an effective parent. So, for example, if a child, a mom will typically, let's say, a 7 or 8 year old child, and the playground is across the street or down the block, and the child will go off to when the child wants to go to the playground, the mother will escort the child to the playground and stay at the playground and watch the child. Let's say the child is 10 or 12, and whereas the father may go to the playground with the child and just let the child be at the playground while the father goes back home and does something. And so then let's say one day the child gets into a big fight on the playground and comes home with a bloody nose or whatever, and it's about time for the mother to see the child again, and the child says, well, the mother says to the child, where was your dad? And the child goes, I guess he went back home. He just walked me over to the playground, but then he went back home. Oh yeah, there was an NFL game, there was a National Football League game on, or a soccer game on today. I'm sure he cared more about the soccer game or the football game than he did about you. But the mother doesn't understand that that from the father's point of view, getting into a brawl on the basketball court, let's say, or on the playground, is a perfect opportunity for the father to work with the child on what led to that. Why did that happen? What could you have done to avoid that? And the father would rather have real-life experiences that are a little bit painful happen to a child during the course of its life, while the child can learn from it through the father's mentorship, whereas the mother wants to prevent the child more frequently from even having that experience to begin with, because it doesn't want the child to be hurt in any way. So when the child is predominantly with the mother and believes that the right way of being parented is being protected like that, the child then begins to feel like the father just doesn't care. And that's the type, or some version of that. And there's just thousands of examples like that, where when there isn't a balance of parenting time-wise, there's not a balance. There's not checks and balances in the system. Children are raised best when there's checks and balances between mothers and fathers, just like nations are governed more effectively when there's checks and balances between branches and parties and ideologies.
Yeah, because the danger is, too, well, particularly for boys in one sense, if there's only mothers around, and this often happens, because often, and I've been a single-parent mother, your other friends are also single parents, so there's really no male models around. One of the problems for the boys is they become extremely feminized, and that's very confusing for them, because when they leave... Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. It's very challenging. Women like as friends boys who are sensitive and feminized. They just can't fall in love with them. They
so do
just don't have passion for them. What's that?
So do teachers. They like feminized.
Yeah, exactly. And so
they like them, but they don't fall in love with them and aren't attracted to them. Is that what I heard you say?
That's precisely correct. They don't. There's not an energy there from the male that really pulls many women in, and so they find themselves saying to the guy, you are really the sweetest guy. I wish my boyfriend was like you. and the guy goes crazy because he's heard that 100 times, and he's just like saying, I don't ever want to hear the word sweet again.
And then you'll even have guys. I've even seen women kick men around like that for complaining about it, because they don't want to hear men's pain about it, and boy, it makes men confused.
Yeah.
She says she wants a nice guy. I'm a nice guy. She treats me like garbage, and then they'll shame him and say, "Well, what do you think? You're entitled to sex from women?" And then he can't win. He can't say anything. Yeah. It's like I literally don't know what to do, and then he's shamed even for not knowing what to do. It's got to be something to change this cultural climate.
But one of the most important things that can change it is equal involvement of both parents. A second is communication, and a third is making sure the universities have men's studies as well as women's studies.
How can we make that one happen, Warren?
Well, I'll share an anecdote with you. I belong to this think tank called the Renaissance Gathering, and one of the people there is, a number of people there are presidents of universities and things like that. And I'm playing tennis with this guy who was at that time president of Northwestern University. And we finished the game, we were having a beer, and he's asked me what I do, and I explained, and he goes, "Wow. That's really powerful stuff. That's really, a university should have something like that." I said, "Well, I'll be willing to work with you at Northwestern University to have the first men's studies program in the world, really." And he goes, "Warren, I would be annihilated by the feminists within minutes. I couldn't last as president if I even suggested that." And so I said to him, "Well, let's do some out-of-the-box thinking here. If I asked you the question, is there any way that a men's studies program could occur at Northwestern University, what would your answer be?" He thought for only a few seconds, and almost without missing a beat, said, "If you sued Northwestern for violation of Title IX, which derives from the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and which is where all the civil rights legislation has come from. If you sued us for not having men's studies as well as women's studies, I could bring in men's studies and be the hero because I would be preventing Northwestern from being a victim of a suit. And so under those circumstances, I could get away with doing it politically. And but of course you would need standing, meaning you would need some students to petition for men's studies who were actually students who actually desired to take men's studies courses. So we do really need to organize that around the industrialized world where there's a complete lack of men's studies.
One of the things that worries me about that is that there is an effort by people like Michael Kimmel and other feminist ideologues, and I hate to just bash on feminists, but I'm sorry, to create what they're calling men's studies, which is really just more indoctrination as to why masculinity is toxic and men are violent and rapey and beady and how they should just... It's more man-shaming stuff. Michael Kimmel is especially guilty of this. I'll call him out by name. He's a horrible advocate for men and boys. I think what he actually does is abusive of men and boys. And they're letting him open a men's studies. But I think the direction of people like Miles Groff is probably a more constructive direction. But
you're absolutely right. Just for people who are new and hearing this, the background on what Dean is saying, first of all, is a very important distinction. There's men's studies that comes through the prism of feminism. So the only portion of men that are looked at is why are men so into pornography and how they shouldn't be? Why do men have the power and how they should give it up? Domestic violence is viewed as the dominant patriarchal powerful person is oppressing the woman, and so everything is looked at through the feminist prism. Now, if Michael were listening to me, he'd say, yes, everything is looked at through the feminist prism. I acknowledge that, but that's exactly the way it should be looked at. And so he would not argue with me about the prism that he takes, through which he looks at it. But the problem with that is, for example, in domestic violence, and I'm bringing this up because you're so good at this, I know you can add to this, Erin, is that when you have a domestic violence situation, as Erin knows, you have male and female usually interacting with each other. If you teach people how to communicate more effectively so they hear each other, domestic violence incidences will go down significantly. But the feminist movement has a paradigm of males have to admit that they are the problem first, and that women-only shelters should be existing for women, and so, and which hurts women in so many ways. First of all, if a man and woman get into a fight, why should a woman be the one who has to leave the house? Why should there not be men's shelters so men can have the option of leaving the house rather than the woman? Secondly, the shelters should be oriented toward helping men and women communicate more effectively so there's less domestic violence, rather than just starting out with the assumption that men have to take that they're the bigger sex and therefore that they are primarily responsible, which is extremely condescending toward women. And so this is the type of thing that the feminist perspective on men's studies misses completely. It's the men's studies groups that are being started with the help of the MacArthur Foundation to the tune of over $500,000. There's $300,000 coming from the MacArthur Foundation to the Center for Men's Studies at Stony Brook that Michael Kimmel's in charge of, and then Stony Brook is putting in more money, and other foundations are putting in more money. So so you have in men's studies a rich man, poor man type of phenomenon. The rich get the money goes to the people who are feminists, who are looking at men through the prism of feminism, and the poor are the people who are looking at men from a way that the average man identifies.
And so I think this lawsuit idea is important, but we've also got to have a rigorous we sometimes on a Voice for Men, we call it counter theory. That men are innately good, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with men, and they're just different, and actually studying men for what they are rather than what they're supposedly supposed to be or supposed to not be, and what their actual needs are. And I know the National Coalition for Men and Miles Groth and others are getting very interested in that. Go ahead, Erin. Sorry.
It mostly goes down to the fact that those of us who worked for years, some 40 years, no, the roots of violence lie in generations of family issues. It has never been anything to do with patriarchy. That is completely a dream of feminism when they realized that they could fund their political ideology on the backs of battered women. And that is really, at the end of the day, what has to be blown up and put away, because both men and women can be equally violent. The most important thing, and the thing that frightens me, is there is no, as you say, as far as I'm concerned, Warren, yes, there should be cases and people bringing cases, because I can't see why men can't work in refuges when the one thing that children desperately need, who have been exhibited as beaten by men, is good, gentle, kind men. Surely that's the first thing you do. That's what we did.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the roots of violence have got to be redefined, because for the moment it is all men, and that's never been the case.
No, yes. That's what they teach. Well, we're winding down now toward the end of the show. I'm going to remind everybody that on September 7th through 29, again, Warren, Dr. Farrell will be doing his couples counseling session for Esalen in Big Sur, California. You can find that info on that on warrenfarrell.com or esalen.org. Also, at that same time, if you're not going that way, if you want to head the other way toward Toronto, there's going to be a great speech put on by the Canadian Association for Equality by Professor Miles Groth toward the end of establishing real men's studies and real men's centers, at least in Canada, and hopefully that will move into the United States. And Voice for Men and Canadian Court Watch and a number of others will be doing a demonstration nearby the very next day, the very next Saturday morning. We hope everybody who can make it, because we believe it is time to confront the ideologues. There will certainly be no violence, but there will be anger and passion and protest and logic and compassion all at once for that event. Warren and Erin, would you like to close with some parting thoughts?
I'll just say, I know that when I bring up some things on men's issues that the average person listening just doesn't quite compute what that is all about. And I'd say, if you're going on the warrenfarrell.com website, there'll be a lot of books there. So let me just maybe direct you according to what your needs are. If you really want to understand what men's issues are and how they could be compatible with women and build bridges with women's needs, I think The Myth of Male Power is the best book that I have to offer on that issue. If what we were talking about with children and their needs for fathers as well as mothers is something that is more relevant to you, then I'd recommend you're going toward father and child reunion. And if the gender pay gap is more the why men are the way that, why men earn more is focuses on those issues. But I'd say that if you're working in this area and you want to get introduced to it in a constructive way, The Myth of Male Power, Father and Child Reunion are probably the two books I've written that I'd probably recommend as starting blocks for that.
Well, The Myth of Male Power certainly changed my life, Warren, and I think everybody listening should read that particular book. Erin, got any parting thoughts or questions for us?
Well, I suppose my parting thought is I am desperate for women who care passionately about men and boys to join with all of us, because we need to hear from women as well as men who want changes.
Thank you, Erin. You're absolutely right about that. I want to thank Dr. Farrell for joining us here today. Erin, as always, glad you're doing so well. Sorry, something else, Warren?
Yeah, just that it's a real honor for me to be with you, Dean, and with Erin. I've had an admiration for Erin and her strength. I know what it is to speak up in an unpopular, with an unpopular voice. And Erin, I have just I totally honor you and really respect what you do and contribute.
Thank you.
And you're going to be rewriting a piece for A Voice for Men soon, I hear, Warren.
Absolutely, yes, I will be.
I can't wait to read it. So there you go, a little surprise. I just popped on the audience. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you. We will be here next week. We're normally on an every other week schedule, but this September we're doing every week, so we will be here next week. We will likely be talking to Attila Vincer of Canadian Court Watch and or Go Rights What, who is also hoping to join the little shindig in Toronto. Thank you all. Have a good night. James, roll one of our other shows and take us home if you would, please.
You have been listening to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. Our show's opening music is called Eternal Hope, and the closing piece is called Sunshine. Both pieces are by Kevin MacLeod and are used under the Creative Commons Attribution License, with a link in the show notes. We also wish to thank James Huff and Paul Elam, and indeed all those who are part of the A Voice for Men community for their support for this show. Remember, in truth there is hope and healing, and we hope that you will be part of helping to spread the truth and the healing. Please join us next time in Revelations with Erin Pizzey.